document that has all the measurements for you. And if you are watching this just strictly on YouTube, you're going to find all the supplies and measurements that I used to create this project in the description of the video. All right, so we're just going to get started. I'm just going to adjust my laptop to make sure that my hands are in camera view. I'm just going to slightly adjust so everything is in good position. All right, so let's talk about the measurements. Or just raise this up a smidge. Okay, so this is our card base. It's Early Expresso, and it is 5.5 by 8.5, and I have scored it at 2 1/8 and 4 1/4. So that's 5.5, 8.5. On the 8.5 inch side, score at 2 1/8 and 4 1/4. So I'm just going to fold this in on the score line. So I've folded in at the 4 1/4 score line and folding in on the 2 1/8 score line. So now your card base is going to look like this. Okay, so we can put that aside for now. I have got a piece of basic beige. This will be for the inside of the card. It is 4 by 5 1/4. A piece of pretty peacock, which is 5 by 3 1/4. Another Early Expresso layer. This is 4 3/4 by 3 1/2. And a piece of the designer series paper that's 4 1/2 by 3 1/4. Now, if your paper is diagonal, you want the image that's facing upward to be the 4 1/2 inch side, not the 3 1/2 inch side. So just be mindful if you are using directional paper that the widest part of the paper should be the image that faces up. And then I've got a crumb cake piece that is 4 1/2 by 1 1/2. All right, let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is stamp a sentiment in Early Expresso right in the bottom left corner of my basic beige layer. So on the long side, the 5 1/4 side, bottom left corner, I'm going to stamp "We're cute together." All right, that is all the stamping I'll be doing on this card, so I'm just going to get the ink out of the way. Excuse me. Now this piece, we will glue down to the inside of the card. Like so. All right, now what we're going to do is build some layers which will go on the front of the card. So we'll start by gluing down our Early Expresso layer to the pretty peacock layer. And you're going to have about an eighth of an inch, I think, border. Let me measure. Yes, about an 1/8 of an inch border around the Early Expresso layer. All right, now glue down the designer series paper to the Early Expresso piece, and the same thing, you're going to have about 1/8 of a border when you map these pieces together. All right, now, excuse me, what I'd like to do is build a little bit of a scene on this panel. So I'm going to take the crumb cake, and this was 1 1/2 by 4 1/2, and my scissors, and all I'm going to do is just cut this paper freehand, a little bit rounded to kind of simulate the ground or a beach. So if you've seen me do this with snowbanks, it's the same concept. I'm just taking that cardstock and with my scissors, I'm just creating a rounded piece that will look like the ground. In this case, I'm aiming for a beach. So I'm just going to add some glue to the back side of this and glue that down on the bottom of the designer series paper. All right, there we go. I've got some beach. Now I went ahead and I fussy cut out some of the otter images from the designer series paper. You can see this one doesn't have its tail because he was an end piece, he or she was an end piece on the designer series paper, and I don't like to waste these cute little images. So I am just going to tuck this otter behind the first image and you won't even know that it's missing its tail. All right, so I'm just kind of getting an idea of where I'm going to put them. And then I'm going to glue the first one down and I'm going to pop up the second one using dimensionals. Oops. All right, I just have to clean up my little mess. One moment. I've got some glue on my workspace when I accidentally dropped that otter, and I did get it on the inside of the card, so what I'm going to do is let that dry, and once it's fully dry, I have a handy little glue eraser. Looks like this. My friend found it for me at a dollar store, but I know you can get them off Amazon as well. And once that little glue smudge, I don't know if you can see it, but once that's completely dry, I'll just gently rub over that glue with my glue eraser, and it's going to rub the glue off and not damage the cardstock. So that's a handy little tip. If you don't have one of these glue erasers, they're really helpful. Okay, so now the first otter is down. I'm going to pop up the second otter. Just going to use a few dimensionals. And put this guy right about there. Okay, so now I did cut out with the dies from this set some seaweed in Old Olive and some smaller pieces in the Pretty Peacock. I'm going to put those in behind these otters. I also die cut out a log. This is going to be our mechanism to pop this card up. So this will be our last step. And then I also cut out some rocks. This is from the designer series paper as well. There's some kind of like a gray marbled look in the designer series paper, and it's perfect for cutting the rocks out. And these rocks, again, they're just little dies that come with the Otterly Adorable Suite. So I'm going to add a little rock right in front of these guys because I just want to cover up the edge of that missing tail. And I'm going to use a mini dimensional. I'm just going to tuck it in, and then I'm going to put a small rock right there. All right, and now I'm going to add a few more rocks, just wherever. It doesn't matter where you put them. And you can pop them up or glue them down. It's completely up to you. And then one more I'll put right behind this otter. Okay, now what I want to do is tuck in some of these green pieces. I'm just going to see where they fit and where I want them. Now, if they're too long, then just snip them or rip off the bottom like I just did. All right, I think I'll put those two there. Now, if you have adhesive backing, that's handy for these kind of dies because they're really tiny. So you can die cut them with adhesive backing on and then they become a sticker. They're really easy to handle that way. I did not think to do that, so I'm just going to use my little tiny glue bottle that came from Amazon that I refill, and it's got a fine tip on it, so it lets me add glue to tiny little areas without making a mess, so it's super handy. All right, now this one I'm going to tuck in right there. And then I've got two more pieces in Pretty Peacock, and I might just use this little piece that I ripped off as well. Maybe not. We'll see. We will see. If I just trim that a little bit more. All right. Now for the little Pretty Peacock pieces, I'm just going to add those in on top of the green old olive green seaweed that I just put down. And they're short, so you shouldn't have to trim them. Oops. And you can add as much or as little extra pieces to this layer as you like. If you don't like it this busy, then you might not even need any of these die cuts. It's totally up to you. Okay, so now we've got our front panel done. It looks like that. And we are going to glue this to the front of the card base, just on that part of the card where we've scored it at 2 1/8 and down to that bottom edge. So we're not gluing on this piece, just that piece that we've got folded over at the 2 1/8 mark. So I'm going to add some glue to the back of this panel, a little less than halfway up because I don't want my glue to leach over the sides. And then I'm just going to glue this down. And there we go. Looks like so. So now we've got our card put together, and all we need to do is add a little mechanism that allows this piece to pop up like so. So I might have forgotten to mention, but this is an easel card. So what we need is something in that corner that's got a bit of dimension to it, so it's going to hold up that front panel of the card. So this little log that I die cut out of early Expresso is perfect. So all I'm going to do is add dimensionals to the back of this log, and I'm going to add as many as I can fit on here. I want this to be a fairly sturdy support for the front of the card. So I might be adding too many. You might not need as many as I'm doing, but 3 for sure. 3 for sure, in my opinion. All right, I just squeezed a little mini in there. Now I'm going to pull out the backings. And then we're just going to put this at an angle because it's a little bit too long for the sentiment I used to put it straight. So I'm just going to put it at an angle so I don't cover up my sentiment. Actually, I'm going to turn it around. There we go. Okay, so now this log is going to hold up the front of the card, like so. All right, so the last thing I want to do with this card is add some of the Riverside Irregular pearls. And I am going to just add those to the front of the card. Like so. All right, project number 3 is done. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and the previous 2 tutorials for the Otterly Adorable class. Thanks so much for tuning in, and catch me next month with my next free online class, which will be using the Cake Celebration bundle from Stampin' Up. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and have a great day.